We are open to Module 13 of Week 6, which will be your final module for this class. We'll be covering Chapter 14, which goes into detail with heart disease, stroke, cancer, and AIDS. So it's the follow-up to the last chapter where we covered more broadly chronic illness, and now we're looking specifically at these 4 very serious illnesses and what the regimens are like and adjustment and coping for individuals with these diseases. So let's take a look at the to-do list. Right off the bat, I just want to point out I have an extra credit opportunity for you in this last week. So just a chance to catch up on a little points here. It's a video assignment on HIV and AIDS. So great way to pick up some extra points if you missed some points earlier in the course, whether it be through a discussion or a test or anything like that. So you can check that out. It's down below, and we'll get to that in just a second. But as you can tell, Chapter 14 has a lot of detail in terms of going over these 4 very serious chronic illnesses. So we're going to start with heart disease. We're going to take a look at what it is exactly. Now we've had a little bit of discussion about this already when we covered stress and how stress affects the heart. And we watched that video about stress. We've talked about eating and how diet and lack of exercise can contribute to heart disease. But here we get into even more detail, looking at key aspects of coronary heart disease. So the different types of coronary heart disease, what the symptoms would be for heart disease, who's at risk, what the prevalence is. And then we go into a little bit more detail. And also what's going to fit nicely is the longevity book, because we'll also be looking at the relationship between negative emotions and heart disease. What's the connection there? And we've seen a lot of how personality fits in with longevity and health. So here's where this will be a nice place to tie some of that in. What is the medical treatment like for someone with chronic heart conditions? So what would the rehabilitation of a cardiac patient look like? What types of things are effective, and what would the key components be of a program aimed to help patients who have suffered, say, a heart attack? What would be the psychosocial impact of heart disease on the person, as well as family relationships? Having a heart attack and surviving is pretty epic. Although more common now, it's by no means easy. And a lot of times the person's life has to change substantially. They may or may not be able to go back to work or the work that they were doing. And there can be a lot of additional strain on marriages, family relationships. So older kids looking after now their more aged parents and so forth. So that will wrap up heart disease, and we'll get into stroke, looking at the various aspects of stroke, specifically biological and lifestyle factors that are related to stroke, and understanding the various impairments that occur with stroke victims. So how is a stroke victim affected when someone suffers a stroke? How does that affect them physiologically, cognitively, emotionally, all of that. We'll talk about some common strategies for coping with stroke, everything from emotional to occupational to social. And then that'll end sort of that segment there. Then we'll get into cancer. And we looked at cancer a little bit in the last chapter. You guys saw the cancer support group video. So you already have a little bit of an understanding about cancer. We'll take a look more at some stats, some prevalence of cancer, the different types, how common are each of those types, and what are the most common types of cancer, and how prevalent are each of them. Who do they affect? Are there any differences depending upon age, gender, or sociocultural factors that come into play with cancer? And then what's the prognosis for someone who has cancer? In other words, what can they expect from a diagnosis of cancer? We'll look at an acronym called CAUTION, which is often used in diagnosing and recognizing cancer. One can be on quite the long journey to even just getting a diagnosis when it comes to cancer. So, looking at some of the most common used tools for diagnosis, and then some more recent cutting edge research in cancer diagnosis. Routes to treatment. What are the side effects to cancer treatment? As some of you may already know, cancer treatment can be quite severe and requires a lot out of the person and the family of that person. So psychosocial factors are key. There's a huge psychosocial impact from cancer. Everything from making decisions about treatment that could be life or death. How does a person know what decisions to make? What about recurrence? If someone is quote unquote cured of cancer, will it come back? How does one adjust after cancer or during cancer treatment? Different emotional issues, and then what's the role of social support? We'll look at psychosocial interventions that are helping in the treatment of cancer, some of which we've already talked about, like the support groups. And then lastly, we'll end with discussion on HIV and AIDS, understanding the difference between those two, as well as what the huge risk factors are for developing HIV and AIDS. So again, some stats for you: prevalence and incidence rates of AIDS in the US as well as worldwide, understanding transmission of HIV, how we get it, some myths with how you get it and how you don't. So we'll debunk some of those. And then how does HIV progress to AIDS? What does that pathway look like? And then describing the typical AIDS treatment regimen. When a person is undergoing treatment for AIDS, what is that like? And why is adherence so hard? HIV and AIDS is one of the hardest illnesses to adhere to treatment for. It's so multifaceted. It is so multifaceted. The drug treatment regimen can be very severe. There's a lot of side effects, sometimes worse than health. And so people don't always do so hot with AIDS treatment. So then lastly, what is then the psychosocial impact of that, as well as the interventions that try to target it? Okay, so that wraps up those categories of chronic illness. Your extra credit video assignment is to watch a video on HIV and AIDS that showcases 6 different individuals living with HIV and progressing to AIDS, what their lives are like, their treatment regimen, and all of that. So you can watch the video and then complete the worksheet and turn it in here to the assignment link for that extra credit. All right, and then your discussion for this chapter is looking at the health harming effects of chronic stress, particularly looking at the disease-prone personality. So if we go back up here really quick, we're looking at sort of trauma, so chronic stress, trauma, how does that affect people? The title of the chapter is The Toll of War and Trauma. You're going to see what the termites went through. A lot of them lived through multiple wars. What toll did that have on them? Some of them suffered some severe trauma in their lives. And why did some thrive even in the face of that and some didn't? So that's chapter 14. And then chapter 15 is sort of like a recap on the whole book. It's just overall, okay, what do we know about the individual pathways to health and long life? So there's some specific questions related to that connection between war and trauma and stress. So that's what some of these questions address. And then, interestingly enough, it also talks about the disease-prone personality, how some people's personality just makes them more vulnerable to disease, particularly depression and heart disease. So you'll have a chance to really tie in those last couple chapters from Serafino and Smith, along with the Longevity Project and what the termites showed. And then also talking about stress and genes. That's where the diathesis stress model comes into play. We talked about that earlier in the semester. And then so the last question kind of deals with just overall, how do you handle stress? And what has research indicated as beneficial for handling stress? And if you have, in fact, encountered some traumatic challenges in your life. I know some of you may have suffered the death of a loved one, a close loved one, or maybe a severe mental or physical illness, or childhood trauma. Oftentimes we have a wide variety of things students have been through. So, thinking about that and thinking about now what the research says about, how to handle those kinds of situations, what's beneficial. What steps might you take the next time you're undergoing a major life change or a stressful event, be it traumatic or just really stressful? What might you do or how might you approach it? So it's a nice recap on some of what we've been talking about all semester, and a nice way to end our discussion with the longevity book in particular. Okay, and then you guys have your last exam, exam 4, which is going to cover chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14. And one thing I just want to reiterate, I know it's in the syllabus, but I just want to remind you all that this is a short week. We don't go all the way through Sunday. The class ends Friday, so you will have until midnight Friday to complete this last exam, as well as get in your responses to discussions. I have those due on Friday the 14th. Your original posts due Thursday. The video assignment is due Wednesday, so try to space it out a little bit. You should definitely be watching the video if you're doing the extra credit early on, so it will help you with the material a little bit more. But make sure to give yourself enough time with the material, and keeping in mind that it's a shorter week. So really kind of zone in on the material Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That's like the bulk of where all your work is going to occur. You don't want to leave it for, Friday. Okay, if you have questions, please let me know. I'm available all throughout the week for any questions that you might have about the material, or just, clarification. I know a few people have been emailing pretty consistently over the course of the semester, and that's just been great. Asking questions, needing more detail, and that's awesome. So I really encourage that. Otherwise, you guys have been a really great short summer class, but I've enjoyed getting to know a couple of you more so, and I wish you all the best in the fall if you're returning for classes this fall. Otherwise, enjoy the remainder of your summer, and it was so nice to have you in the class.